Good morning. I'm Amber Pierce, here to talk to you about what's happening in this year's Giro Rosa. Today I'm talking about stage 6. So the situation leading into stage 6 is that we have Mara Abbott from Team USA in the leader's jersey with a fair margin over her competitors. And what that means is then that her team, the US national team, is in charge of defending that jersey. This is a great responsibility. I mean great in the sense that it's a highly respected and prestigious responsibility, but it's also a large responsibility in the sense that it's very difficult. This means that anytime a break goes up the road or which might threaten the GC, all of the teams in the race are going to look to Team USA to bring that back because they are the ones that have the greatest interest in maintaining their lead in the GC. So not only is it a great honor, but it's also a lot of work. If your team is defending the leader's jersey in any tour, with that, like I said, with that comes prestige, but also respect. And if you are on that team and you are defending the jersey in the peloton, there is an unspoken etiquette that the other teams and riders in the peloton will allow you to move more easily through the group in order to get to the front to do the job at hand, which is of course to defend the leader's jersey. And part of that is respect, and part of it is an acknowledgement that you really have your work cut out for you. So most of the riders in the peloton have at one time or another been in that position. They know how hard that job is, and so they are going to go ahead and give those riders and that team a little bit more space to move around to get to the front and to be able to do their jobs. And that's just a nice aspect of the sport. It's a very nice example of the sportsmanship that goes on in the peloton. So again, we had a really long stage. On a stage like today, we might see some of the domestiques coming out and going for a breakaway. And in fact, that is what we did see happen. Yesterday, I talked a little bit about what happens in the gruppetto, which is when the domestiques and support riders have finished their jobs for their team leaders, they will then slow way down and try to conserve their energy for the following stages where they will again be asked to come forward and do a lot of work for their teammates. And when they slow down after their job is done, they accumulate into groups where they relax, they eat, they drink, and they basically try to finish the stage in as slowly as possible while still making the time cut. When they do that, they end up losing a lot of time in the general classification. And yesterday we saw some riders losing as much as 20 minutes in the general classification. Interestingly, this can set up what could be a good tactic on a stage like today, or excuse me, on a stage like stage 6. If you are a support rider and you have lost over 20 minutes, that gives you a longer leash if you're in a breakaway. So let's say, for example, we have a breakaway go up the road and everybody in that breakaway is 20 minutes down on the GC. The leader's team, in this case Team USA, could probably comfortably give that breakaway at least a 10-minute gap without endangering their team leader's position in the general classification. And what that does is it gives that team a little bit of a break, so they don't necessarily have to put in a ton of work intensely to jump and bring that break back. They can give it a longer leash. So as a domestique, this can actually be a decent tactic. If you know that you have no chance in the general classification, you can choose to lose a lot of time on one stage so that you're really far down on the GC. And what that does is it gives you potentially a longer leash if you want to go into a breakaway. In other words, the peloton is going to be more likely to let you go up the road in a breakaway the further down on the GC that you are. And of course, we did see a lot of riders going after this tactic today. First, we saw Voss going after a breakaway, and again, she initiated this breakaway on a descent in a classic style of hers. She's such a skilled descender that she can really push those descents and use that technical skill to her advantage to try to create a gap. She did get a breakaway going for a short period of time, but of course she's too much of a threat in the GC to give any kind of a leash, especially given what a formidable competitor she is. So Team USA obviously brought that back immediately. After that, there was another flurry of attacks. We saw a big breakaway getaway, and big in this case was really good because it meant that the breakaway had riders from all of the major teams, so every team was represented, and all of those riders in the breakaway were very far down on GC. Apparently the highest placed GC rider in that breakaway was 17 minutes down. And in this case, it would have been possible or conceivable for Team USA to let that breakaway go and get 5, maybe even 10 minutes of gap on the group, and maybe not put in a ton of work to bring it back. But for whatever reason, Team USA decided to go ahead and bring that breakaway back. This could have been for many reasons. They might have just decided that they wanted to set the stage up for a stage win for their team leader, Mara Abbott, on that final climb, and maybe they didn't want to give anybody an inch. It's also possible that they didn't know exactly who was in the breakaway. In this race, the racers are not using radios, so they have no access to, they don't have instantaneous access to the information about which rider's in the break and exactly what the gaps are. You do get time gaps from the motorcycle that comes back to the group, and they'll have a little whiteboard that shows you the time gaps. Unfortunately, getting information this way is a little bit dicey, because oftentimes the gaps that you get from the motorcycle are actually incorrect, or they're already outdated. So by the time they've taken the time gap and they come back to show the peloton what the time gap is, the time gap has already changed. The only way to get information about who would be in the break if you didn't actually see it happening would be for those riders to come back to the team car, talk to the director, ride back up to the front of the race, tell their teammates, and then make a decision about what to do. That takes a lot of time. So I would imagine Team USA had it in their heads that they were defending the pink jersey and they were going to take control of the race, and that's exactly what they did. So that breakaway did not end up surviving. It did stay away actually quite a while until the base of the final climb. And again, we saw Mara Abbott putting her world-class climbing skills to use, climbing again to a solo stage win, and again solidifying her lead in the general classification and putting more time into her competitors. After the stage, we had quite a bit of drama in that one of the riders, Fabiana Luperini, was actually disqualified because her bicycle weighed too little. Now, there is a rule that our International Cycling Federation has instituted which says that bicycles cannot be any lighter than 6.8 kilograms. And the reason for this is that we have such quickly advancing technology that it is possible to make ridiculously light bicycles, and out of concern for the safety of the riders, they don't want, for example, bikes that are so light that they sacrifice structural integrity. They've just set this weight limit that riders have to abide by. Although I know that this rule exists, as an athlete I've actually never weighed my bike, nor could I tell you how much it weighs. Part of the reason for that, though, is that I'm a much larger rider, which means that I'm going to be riding a much larger frame. So given that the size of my frame is going to be much bigger than most other riders in the peloton, there's very little chance that my frame and my bicycle in particular are going to approach this weight limit. Whereas if you're a much smaller rider, like Luperini, for example, she's going to be riding a much smaller frame size. In fact, she would probably be riding the smallest frame size that's manufactured by their bike sponsor. In some cases, some of the women in the peloton are actually so small that the manufacturers don't make bicycles small enough to fit them, and they actually need to get custom frames built that are small enough to fit their stature. And when this happens, then you're starting to look at a bicycle that could potentially be approaching this weight limit, and that would be far more relevant for a smaller rider like Luperini than it would be for a rider of my size. This brings up an interesting point, which is the relationship between the athletes and the mechanics, and in general the team staff, and how the responsibilities are divided up. Obviously, in a perfect world, in a very professionally run team, the mechanic is going to be fully in charge of the management of the equipment, and the athletes are going to be in charge of training, preparing for the race, recovery, nutrition, all the things that they need to do to prepare themselves as an athlete to perform their best. And these responsibilities are divvied up for a reason, because it's far more efficient. That said, the responsibilities actually in some ways overlap, in my opinion, and I think that it's actually important for the athletes to take responsibility for the condition of their equipment. Of course, you're going to leave most of the work up to the mechanic. That's their job. So after the race, you're going to give the mechanic the bike. The mechanic is going to go through, he's going to address, he or she will address any mechanical issues that perhaps you had during the race. They're going to clean the bikes, they're going to clean the chains, they're going to make sure everything is well lubricated. One of the biggest factors during a long tour like this is friction. So the less friction that you have in the drivetrain on the bike, the less energy you're going to be wasting. Again, we've talked a lot about conserving energy through a big stage race like this, and one of the ways that you can do that is making sure that something as simple as having a clean chain is going to reduce the friction that you're going to be fighting when you're on the bike, and over a week this can add up to a lot of energy. So the mechanic's job is extraordinarily important, and they have a lot of work to do. They have a very long to-do list at the end of every stage, and you have to imagine that in a race like this, they have extremely long transfers, so the mechanics don't even get to start their work until they get to the hotel after the race, and sometimes that might be 3-4 hours after the stage is finished, and then they have to go through, take care of each of the bikes, and not only taking care of the bikes, but the caravan cars, the vans, the buses, whatever vehicles that the team may have. So these mechanics are extremely busy, and as much as they are professionals and as skilled as they are, and as much as they care about the quality of their work, they are also only human. And that's where I think that it's important that we as athletes take responsibility for our own safety, and if we get the bike before the race, just do a quick check. Check to make sure there aren't any, obviously loose bolts. Check your brakes. Check to be sure that the skewers are tight. Just real basic things like that. I'll even travel oftentimes with a tape measure just to double check the seat height on my bike, because you never know. Sometimes the seat post can slip accidentally, and it's something that maybe the mechanic didn't catch when they were cleaning their 20 bikes at 2 o'clock in the morning. In the case of the disqualification, it's the athletes that pay the price. Of course, it's a huge disappointment for the whole team. But again, I think it comes back to that shared responsibility. Certainly, it's very possible that this could simply have been an oversight. We are all, of course, aware of this rule. But like I said, these mechanics have a lot of responsibilities to look after during a stage race. And of course, as an athlete, that particular rule is not necessarily the first thing that you would think of when you're getting ready for a tour. Today, stage 7 is going to be a flat stage. Given that yesterday was a long and grueling stage and we still saw speeds of over 50 km an hour in the beginning of the race, I can imagine that we're going to see speeds at least that high in today's race. Again, we're going to be looking at Team USA to control the race. That's their responsibility as defenders of the leader's jersey. They may actually get some help from other teams who have sprinters in the peloton and may have an interest in keeping the whole field together coming into the finish. That said, USA Cycling has a great sprinter in Lauren Hall, and given that she's pretty far down on the GC and is no longer a GC threat, it would make sense to put her in a breakaway with other non-GC threats, because she's got a very fast finish and could easily go for a stage win out of a break. In doing so, having one of their riders up in the breakaway, Team USA would take the pressure off themselves a little bit, because anytime that you have a teammate in the breakaway, you have no responsibility to chase that breakaway down. So as long as the breakaway is composed of non-GC threats and USA Cycling has a representative in that breakaway, they might be able to breathe a little bit easier and give that breakaway somewhat more of a leash. We'll see a lot of interesting tactics playing out in this race today. And I will be here again tomorrow to talk a little bit about what happens and what actually plays out in stage 7. And of course, after stage 7, we have the final time trial, which is going to determine the final general classification. So with that, I'll say goodbye, and until tomorrow. See ya.